Hello everybody, my name is Aceface. I wanted to make a video here for you new bros, complete new bros to the EVE Online, just explaining what is the Abyss. What is it? What is this aspect of the game? You may have heard it, seen some video, oh you can get so much ISK from the Abyss. But what actually is the Abyss? Well, the Abyss is quite simple in a way. There is a type of, you could say, dungeon or instanced PvE. You can have dungeon room that you can go to with the help of a key. Now, Abyss works in that you need to have a filament or filament key. There are different types of filaments to go into the Abyss. When you go into the Abyss with the filament key, you teleport to the Abyss. It's a separate dimension, and there you fight enemies. And then when you fight enemies, there's loot containers to get and destroy, and you can loot these loot containers and get very good ISK, because you can sell the items from these loot containers on the market for good profit, since they're in quite high demand. So if we go here and start with the filaments. So in the Abyss, there are 6 different tiers of filaments. If we go in trade goods and we go in filaments, there are 6 tiers of filaments. So if we go and say in dark filament, there is even actually, you could say 7 actually, because you've got tranquil is T0, and then the calm is T1. It's a bit unintuitive here in this market tab. Maybe it's better looking here. No, it's not. We can't really see it here. But you can look in the icon. You can see tranquil. Tranquil has no lines here. You can see tranquil has no lines here, so it's T0. Calm is T1. Agitated is T2. Fierce is T3. Raging is T4. Chaotic is T5, and Cataclysmic is T6. The point here is that the Abyss has different levels, and the higher the level, the higher the difficulty, the more NPCs, the more difficult NPCs you encounter, etc. So many people can run these straight out the bat, these T0s or tranquil as they say. Few can run Cataclysmic or T6s. But the thing you have to remember is that the higher tier of the Abyss, the more loot you get. I would say it's about double, something like that, the loot, give or take, for each tier of Abyss you got up. But you get quite a bit more loot in terms of ISK value. If you do T6 sites, Cataclysmic sites that is, you can get up towards like 400 million ISK if you do that. While maybe Calm or Agitate, you get, I don't know, maybe 40-50 million ISK now, depending on how good you run them. It depends a lot degree, these lower tier ones, how well you run them. Then when it comes to the Abyss, we've got different types of weathers. So there's dark weather, electrical weather, exotic, firestorm, and gamma. And all these have the same. So they have tranquil, raging, chaotic, etc. The exact same way. All of them work the same way. But there's different weathers. And weather does not really do a whole lot apart from it just reducing either certain resist or giving certain buffs or debuffs. So gamma gives reduced explosive resistance. We can see this here. It's reduced explosion resistance and enhanced shield strength. So these are the certain buffs and debuffs you get. Firestorm reduces thermal resist and enhances armor strength. And when you have these resists reduced, it affects everything. So it affects your own ship, it affects the NPCs, it affects your drones, it affects everything. So this means that, say I'm doing a firestorm or say I'm doing a gamma, it's good to go with a ship that's able to do explosive damage, because if you're doing a gamma, because explosive resistance is reduced here, so then you do more damage essentially. Same thing with firestorm, we want to do thermal damage because thermal resistance is reduced here, so on the enemies. And then maybe we want to patch up our ship with extra thermal resistance to be able to not die quickly to thermal intense NPCs. Exotics, enhanced scan resolution, so you scan quicker, and then less kinetic resistance. Electrical reduced EM, but enhanced ship capacitor recharging, so your capacitor recharges faster here. Dark doesn't actually affect any resist, but reduces weapon range and also enhances ship velocity. So you go really fast and it has a very hard time hitting stuff because of reduced weapon range. So there's 6 or even 7 tiers of filaments, and then you've got 5 different weather effects that have different buffs and debuffs depending on how you look at it. So that's how the keys work. How do you run them then? Well, the way it works is we can just take a ship we've got here. This is a hawk. It's a frigate. And if I want to run them in a frigate, if I want to run them in a frigate, for example, which often people will recommend new players start doing a low tier abyss in a frigate, it gets a little bit more intricate when it comes to frigates, because abyss can only be run with one filament in a cruiser. If you run with a destroyer, you have to use 2 filaments or 2 keys. If you run with a frigate, you have to use 3. And the reason for this is that when you're using a cruiser, so say I'm using, let's say I'm using the very classical ship that is using the Abyss, the Gila. If I'm using a Gila, I can only max bring one of these into the Abyss. So that's why I use one type of Abyss filament. But if I'm using a destroyer, I can bring a friend with me using a destroyer, and we can do it, but we need to have 2. And even if you're running them solo, you need to bring 2. And the same thing goes with frigates, but we can use 3, so you can have 2 additional friends with frigates, but you have to use 3 filaments. So that's why, even if you're doing it solo, you always need to have the filaments with you in the correct amount. So we'll then run basic, calm, exotic. And the reason for this is because the calm exotic is just an easy filament, but in particular, the reason I'm choosing the exotics for this Hawk is because this Hawk has a bonus. If we look at its ship bonuses to the light and rocket missiles, it has particularly to kinetic light and rocket damage. So we do additional kinetic damage. And what happens in the exotic filaments? We have the reduced kinetic resistance. So we will actually do more essential damage to the NPCs than we otherwise would with a different type of ship and maybe a different type of filament. So that's why the Hawk in this case is pretty suited for the exotic side. Hawks also are very, if you just talk about a bit more advanced gaming, then the Hawks actually are more suited for darks. The darks are very good because the darks allow you to go really fast and you're able to avoid stuff very quickly. So I would actually say the darks in a way are very suited for the Hawks, maybe even more. But to run the Abyss, you have to undock, and you have to also be in a certain security status system. Now my overview is completely ruined here because on my character here I've got the overview a bit messed up. But to run Abyss you need to be in 0.8 or lower. So you can see here it cannot be activated in 1.0 or 0.9 system. So depending on the security status of the system, you can run certain Abyss filaments tiers. So T1, which is the calm, can be run in 0.8 and lower. If we were to go in the agitated, same thing. If we go in the, which is T2, and then we go into the fierce, go here, T3, same thing, 0.8 and lower. The complexity emerges when we go into the raging or T4 and up. So this makes it so that we will be flagged as a suspect if we activate this in a 0.8 system. So we're going to run this T1 in a 0.8 system because it doesn't matter. But if we were to say hypothetically do a raging filament or a T4 filament in this 0.8 system, when we are finished with this dungeon, this instance, this PvE site, then we will be flagged as a suspect. So 15 minutes, people can freely engage us. And that can be very dangerous because maybe people like to camp outside these abyssal filaments, because when you enter the abyss, you go to a different dimension, as I mentioned before. And when you are in this dimension, then there's like an abyssal trace where you jumped in, and people can scan that down and actually then wait outside for you if you're using the wrong type of filament, and they can see what type of filament you're running, so they can get prepared and set up an ambush for you. So it's very important to not run the wrong type of abyssal filament in the wrong area of space. You can still run them in a 0.8 system, but I would not recommend it because you'll be flagged as a suspect. So if I wanted to run these ones here, I would go to a 0.7 system because then I don't get flagged as a suspect. So you need to be in a place which is free from like space stations and big planetary bodies, and not even planetary bodies, but just like big structures. So a good place is in an asteroid belt. An ideal place is if we go into our personal locations here, and then when we're warping to a celestial, then we can warp within 100 and whatever, just warp to some place. Personal locations, And then we can add location, just type safe or abyss start, and then make a area or bookmark in the middle of space so that we can go here, and then we don't have to get interfered that we can't not run it. We can't run it because there's nothing in this point that I saved in the middle of space when I was warping. There's nothing close to us, so we'll always be able to run it. And then also it's less likely that people will keep an eye on us that, oh, look at that guy is running abyss sites, because they won't be able to see us. But they can if they use the D-scan and also use probe scanners, so you're not completely safe when you're running in the middle of nowhere. But it reduces the risk of people trying to sneak up on you here for some reason that you're running them in the wrong security status. Okay, so I've got 3 filaments here because I'm running a frigate. You always need to have 3 filaments as a frigate. My character is Abyssal Raider, so I'll form a fleet with myself, because it is also always required to form a fleet with yourself when you're using a frigate or a destroyer, because they assume that you're going to have other friends helping you. So that's why you have to use 3 at the same time. One important aspect to know is that when you're using 3 filaments or 2 filaments in the destroyers, you get double or triple the loot. So in the case of frigates, if I were to run this T1 as a frigate, then the loot is 3 times. I also use 3 filaments as well. But if I were to do a cruiser and do the same T1, I'll get 1/3 of the loot. Or basically the frigates get 3 times more because it's a bit harder for them. So I'll go here, this calm exotic, and do this very easily. Calm exotics or just calm filaments are a very easy type of filament for this hawk here. And the abyss in general, it works in that you just go into this dimension. So we're in this dimension and we're in a big area, but if you go out, there's an invisible border a few, like maybe 50, 100 kilometers away, and if we go outside there, then we will die because there's something called the abyssal depth. So it'll gradually do more damage the further we go out. So if we go out, we'll take more and more damage. So you can afford to go into this boundary a little bit. You'll just take a bit of damage, but then if you keep going out, you'll take exponentially more damage and eventually die very quickly. But the point here is you just come into the abyss, you make your way towards the transfer conduit and the biocommutative cache. These are the 2 things you want to keep an eye on, and just kill the NPCs. That's what you have to do. The main thing is just to kill the NPCs. There is this loot. The main loot is in the biocommutative cache or the bioadaptive cache, and that loot then it can be retrieved when you've shot it here. So I just shot this loot and I can grab this. And then there's also these extraction nodes which carry a lot less loot, which are a little bit scattered all over the map. You don't have to take them. You don't even have to take any loot at all, but main thing is to get the bioadaptive cache. And then extraction nodes, I would say get them if you can afford it or you have enough time, because in the abyss there's a time limit. You've got 3 rooms. This is one of 3 rooms, and there's random NPCs in each room. So we're in this room here against these rogue drones. You have to complete these 3 rooms within 20 minutes. You've got 18 minutes left on us. If we don't, we will die. So it's important that you complete these very quickly, or as quick as you can, because you do not want to be left here. Because if you just like go AFK, log out, you can't just log out, because then you will remain here. And 20 minutes goes, ship goes bye-bye, pod goes bye-bye, and you can't get out of here. The only way to get out of here is through completing this. You can't get out of here by like just logging out or anything like that. So the abyss is harsh. The abyss is harsh. It's hardcore. It's not the easiest or most forgiving type of activity, but if you're having difficulties, just do a tier that's lower until you get more comfortable in doing higher tier. Make your ship a lot better. You can get a lot by improving the capabilities of your ship by spending a bit more cash on your ship. So another room here, we've got more NPCs. I just go to the biocommutative cache and the transfer conduit. In the frigate and destroyer abyss, these are called biocommutative caches because they give more loot. In the case of frigates, as I mentioned before, we get 3 times the loot as a cruiser would, or in destroyers they get double the amount of loot as a cruiser would. So that's why it's called combinative cache. If I'm doing this in a cruiser, it'll be called bioadaptive cache. So that's why I'm just saying bioadaptive/biocommutative cache interchangeably. It's the same concept here. I just attack these guys. This hawk is really powerful, so I can go and wreck them. In general, I would say in the abyss it's good to be able to tank thermal damage, because there are a lot of NPCs that do a lot of thermal damage here. These Damaviks are examples of them that do explosive and thermal damage. But this is otherwise in the T1s like this is pretty easy when you've got a decent ship. T1s for brand new players can also be very difficult, so I'd always recommend everyone to just start with a T0. I've made tons of videos on how to start in T0 filaments, but don't try doing T1 straight away if you're a brand new player. I'm a pretty experienced player with a pretty good ship here, so that's why this T1 is looking baby easy, but it's not baby easy at all if you are a little bit less experienced or you've not got such a good ship. I mean, I've not got the most amazing ship, but if you are a newbie Alpha Clone, you can't even use these Tech 2 ships here, so that's why I'm talking about in relation to like Alpha Clones. Grab the loot, and the same case here, transfer conduit. So we've now completed basically the second room. So I mentioned before, there's 3 rooms in total, so we've got 1 more to go. In the Abyss, you can see the effects that we mentioned before here. So we've got reduced kinetic resistance and better scan resolution. This is just a reminder here that you've got the exotic particle swarm. You can also encounter these different types of structures and also clouds here. So this is a short-range Diva Automata suppressor, and these are very good to keep an eye on because they will cause problems for drone-based ships and missile-based ships. These, when you get close with either shooting missiles or drones, your drones fly close to this will shoot them. So it'll shoot your missiles and it'll shoot your drones. So if I shoot my missiles will get shot down. Some of them will hit the target, but if I'm close enough, then hardly any of them will hit the target actually. So if I were to take my Hawk and I was to fly close to that short-range Diva Automata suppressor we can see over there, then I would be hitting very little of my missiles on the targets. Same case if I was to use a drone, my drones would take a lot of damage, so if my drones fly around that short-range Diva Automata suppressor for long enough time, they will get destroyed, and they can get destroyed quite easily because there's a medium-range one and there's a short-range one. The short-range one has a range of about 15 kilometers and does tons of damage. The medium-range one, I think it has a range of like 30-40 kilometers, does a little bit less damage. So these short-range ones can be very dangerous, so you keep an eye out for them. They can cause problems if you're a missile-based ship or a drone-based ship. So you can encounter these that can cause problems, and they can also be in your favor as well. If you're facing rogue drones, they can also shoot down the rogue drones as well. So they can also help you a little bit at the same time. When it comes to these clouds over here, there's different types of clouds. They give different abilities. If I can see correctly, there's a bit of a yellowish, whitish cloud here, and that is then a speed cloud if that is the one. If you go into it, you go really fast, so be careful for them because they'll chuck you out of the arena. The blue cloud here is a cloud that makes your signature radius bigger, so it'll make it so that you are able to get hit a lot easier by like big stuff if there's a battleship or something, but it'll also make it so that small stuff is able to be hit a lot easier as well. So it just increases the signature radius. If you're not familiar with signature radius, just bigger signature radius makes it easier to hit it, you can say in simple terms. I shoot one missile here. Same concept here. This is the last room. And then we get an origin conduit, which again says that this is the last room because it takes us back to space. So while we're here in the Abyss, what do we see in the regular space? Well, we see this abyssal trace exactly where we launched the Abyss. Someone can scan this down, someone can go to us, someone can use core probe launchers on us and find us. It's unlikely that someone's going to go to us, but it can happen. There are 2 situations where you want to be slightly careful with this. One is, as I mentioned before, if you go into the wrong security system, you'll go as a suspect when you exit the Abyss. Another is if you're using a very expensive ship, then you could have the case where you get suicide ganked because people will want to kill you because you've got so expensive stuff in your ships. They can try killing you in high tech and try to loot your stuff after they kill you in the short time before Concord arrives. So those are the 2 things to keep in mind. Don't want to run too expensive stuff here because in high tier filaments it actually is a thing where people suicide gank people because they know that people running high tier filaments are very experienced players with lots of money in their ships. So that is the Abyss. A simple PvE activity which has a lot of nuances to it, enables lots of different styles of gameplay, enables a lot of different types of ships to be used, frigates, destroyers and cruisers, and you can make the fit up however you want, get lots of random different NPCs to fight against, learn their patterns, 3 rooms, loot in them all, and try to make the best of it. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you learned something new. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. I'll catch you guys later.